Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Sunday. Back to more box making and hopefully an interesting day for you. So let's get on with it pretty much straight away. Somebody mentioned to me the other day that, that they often watch YouTube channels and there's too much talk. I don't know. I tend to just give the information that I think you need. Or most people ask me anyway. So anyway, what we're going to do today is we're going to go straight into a little bit of visualization or testing different things to fit the box that we're working with. Remember, we started with this box as a sort of an agricultural sort of approach to the box. We didn't have a plan. We were just going to sort of make it up on the fly as we went along. And that's what we're going to do today. And this is part of how we go about that. So, or at least I go about it. So this is what we're going to do. So on the desk in front of me, you can see I've got lots of bits and pieces. And I'm basically testing everything that we do, or everything that I use for the building of the box. Now, we've established that we're going to have a finger joint box with a drawer in it, but that's about as far as we went. So we had to sort of figure out what we're going to do with the box from here on in. The material for the drawer, the day we're going to build the drawer, I've got the material ready there, so we're going to do that. But the rest of it is basically setting up some ideas so that we've got something to sort of move along to once we've built the drawer and so on. So this is what we're doing. So I'm just going to go to the other camera and I'll show you what we've got. So if you'll notice that on the box, we've got these little feet here. All right, and so I've turned the box over because that's the way it's going to look when the back of the box is going to look once it's built. And I've designed just little round feet, and I've turned them on the lathe, and this is what they look like. So these are narrow ones. The ones that I've got on here are 15 millimeters high. These ones are 10 millimeters high. And of course a 10 millimeter spigot in the center of it, so that we can just drill a hole in the box and recess it into the box. And they're made from cedar, which is the same material. Here's another shape we did. Now, not quite sure how that shape's going to work, but again, this is where we do a little bit of testing of the different shapes and so forth. So I do lots of different designs, and then we'll pick and choose, audition each of them so that we've got a bit of an idea of what the box is going to look like with that particular shape. The other thing that we do is we work on different materials for panels. So this will be the edge of the panel, edge of the frame and panel lid. So just imagine that going all the way around. And then I have 4 timbers here. You can see I've got some black heart sassafras, bit of camphor, some macadamia, which you don't see very much of. Just happened to pop up at some stage, and I grabbed it when I could, and of course some she oak. Okay, now this is the southern she oak. It's quite dense, quite hard, and as you can see, the colour range is quite significant as well. So what I tend to do is I position a piece of material. That's how the frame's going to look. It's going to have a little bit of an overlap over the top of it. Now, as I'm thinking about this, what I'm going to do is I might round over the top of the top. I might also round off that so it's in keeping with the feet. So there's that thought as well. But auditioning the top bits, this is what the panel's going to look like in the box. Now, it can have it round that way, or I can have it around this way. This is the she oak, of course, and you can see the variation in the colours. Excuse me. And so we've got that particular timber. So then we go on to the macadamia, and you can see it's got pinks and reds, and they sort of match in with the cedar. And you can see it's sort of grey along the edge here, so we'll probably end up trimming a little bit of that off. So it goes around this way, or even if we have the grey up against the edge of the box, again, it's another way of looking at it. And then we have the camphor laurel. Okay, so the camphor looks like that. And when you look at the camphor, you can see that this mould that's in the, or blue mould that's in there, it almost looks like the fiddleback that occurs here. And if you turn it over, you can see a lot of that disappears apart from where the fiddleback is. And when you put a bit of finish on that and give it a good sand it up and get it nice and clean, you'll find that will sheen. You'll get a nice little shine about it, and that fiddleback will show up quite significantly. So having a look at those sorts of things and are important when you're doing your box. Now, the way I know, the reason I know that will shine when it's got a finish on it is because I have a reasonable amount of experience with lots of different pieces of timber that have different faults and things. And then we have the blackheart sassafras. Now this is a rare timber, so it's hard to get hold of. So you make sure that you use all of the timber that you actually get hold of. And you can look at this one here, and on the other side you've got fairly significant grain configuration that looks really, really nice. And turn it around, it probably looks better. So, you know, like it's all subjective, and we'll yeah, have a look when we go. So that's how I go about getting things organised, so that we've got at least somewhere to follow, somewhere to go along with once we've started getting to that stage. So today, let's look at, as you can see, just go back here, there's the 4 feet that I made earlier, and you can see these ones are a little bit smaller. So today, if we get chance, we might be able to turn a couple of those. So we'll have a look at that. We'll see how we go with the draw. Okay, now the draw. What I wanted to show you before we get started was how the inlay came out. So that was the box after we glued it all together last week, and you can see the inlay in there looks really nice, and that was the error that I made a couple of weeks ago. So I'm quite pleased with it. You can see it all the way around inside the box, and it looks really nice. So errors don't always have to be a piece of timber chucked in the corner. They can actually be enhanced and turned into something that looks really, really nice. So this is the one we're going to build the draw for. Now I have my material, and what I have here, that's the back and the front. It's the 2 sides. I'm using silver ash for the frame. So that's the size of the draw. Now people say to me, well, it's not a real draw because that's not how they're made. And they're right. A draw generally has a floor in it that's slid in from the back on a trench. Okay, so this one here will have a little rebate in the back of it so that the draw can be, or the base can be slid into the trenches on the side. This is more a tray. So that whole tray will fit inside that cavity, and then on the front of it I'm going to glue and screw a piece of material which is the same as this. Okay, so that will actually end up the front of the drawer. Okay, so I've just got to cut it to size. Now the important thing to remember here is make sure that that material is as close as you can get it to that once you've already cut this out, because when you cut this out, obviously it was so badly damaged when we cut it out on the bandsaw that you can't use it again unless you want to cut it out with a jigsaw, but then you have a large gap around the inside of the drawer. So I've cut another piece of material that's pretty close to the, it goes this way, to the material in the box, so it's not going to look out of place. If If it does look out of place, I'll just run a bead of silver ash around there so that it highlights the drawer itself and makes it a deliberate function. But that will be the false front for my drawer, like so. Okay, so that's the process that we're going to go through. Now, the first thing we need to do, because that's going to be screwed to that, what I need to do is I need to drill a couple of holes in here before I start, because it's very difficult once you've got the box frame made to actually get a drill press in there and countersink these holes. So over on my drill press, before I do that, I better mark where I'm going to drill the holes. So a ruler, I need a pencil. Now, that's going to be there. I need a screw about here, I suppose, and another one about here. There's no definite place to put it. I put it on there because I've got those two there, and if I put a handle on it, the handle is actually going to hold the centre of the pieces together. So that mechanical holding mechanism is going to go all the way across there. So if I just come in here, say 50 millimetres, and half of that, so that's 40 mil, so my 20 millimetre mark, so that's going to give me accuracy there. Do the same up this end, 50 mil, and then 40, so that's where my mark is going to be. So I'm going to drill and countersink 2 holes there, and make sure that you do it on the inside. Now, before I started, I sanded everything to 600. So everything is nicely sanded. Now let's go over to the drill press. Now, on the drill press, what I have here is, this is the screw that I'm going to, I don't know if you can see that, this is the screw that I'm going to use to hold the 2 parts together. Okay, so it's quite small. So make sure that the drill press, the drill bit you use, which is this one here, is the right size for it. Okay, so what I've got there is a countersinking drill bit. It's just a matter of drilling that in there. I can hang on to it. And so the screw is going to pop in there quite nicely, so that'll go straight through there. Okay, so that's what's going to happen with that. Now it's time to start looking at cutting some dovetails. Now let's talk about the size before we go. I'm going to use my H10 cutter. Now remember, this is the inside where we've got the countersunk bits, so of course that's the outside, and we will mark it as such. But what I want to do is just make sure that my piece of material goes all the way into the back. You can see here, can't see that? You can see that there's a little bit of a gap, right? So what I want is, I want 1 millimetre more than this space here. Okay, that's about 2 millimetres. That's too much. I'm going to have to trim it down. That way, when I adjust my router bit to cut my dovetails, I've got an overlap of 0.5 millimetre, and when I sand it off, it will be flush with the edge of the front edge of the box. Okay, so be very careful about that. The same applies to these pieces. It's got to fit in there, like so, and you can see I'm a couple of millimetres over. So I'm going to take 0.5 millimetre off each end, and that will give me a nice fit. And I want the this to fit perfectly into there. Okay, I could leave it like it is. In fact, I will leave it like it is because I've got probably a millimetre over each end. That way I can fit it perfectly on the sides. The back doesn't matter a great deal, so even if you've got a tiny little gap at the back of the drawer, that doesn't matter. It's going to be stopped by this piece here anyway, so it won't bang into the back of the drawer, but I need to trim these two pieces down. So they're exactly the same size, these are exactly the same size. Now I could have done the whole drawer in silver ash, the whole frame of the drawer in silver ash, but I didn't. I did it in, I put this piece on here so that when we cut our dovetails, the dovetails are going to show in the end of the piece of silver ash. All right, so just a little feature that sticks out a tiny little bit. And why am I using dovetails as and not finger joints for a finger joint box? Dovetails are a much stronger and safer joint for drawers. So I need to trim this off by a millimetre. So I'll do that, and I'll just do them together. So I'm just going to mark a millimetre. And I'll cut both of those together. Now I could just get onto the shooting board, but it's a lot easier on the drop saw. Set my mark up. Just using the I'm just making sure it's flush on the end. I'll just trim that off. So back to my bench. And now you can see that I've only got a 0.5 millimetre left over, which is perfect for what I want to do. So now just get rid of my box out of the way. Now that Chris Clark from Woodsmith, who came up with this lovely idea of using the centre of the board as adjustment, I've started using that quite a bit lately, and I find that it's actually giving me really good accuracy, particularly when I'm making lots of different drawers or lots of parts of drawers, and where I'm doing things, you know, lots of bits at the same time. Not necessarily during where I'm making a one-off, but when I'm doing a lot of different things, like with drawers, you've got two sides to the drawer, and I do them all at the same time rather than individually. And I find this centering system, I'll put a light line down the inside, need a piece of chalk. That's my inside. So my outside, I need to mark all my pieces. You can't see the chalk mark on the white stuff, but, and again, that's the inside. So that will be the outside. So I have all of those marked, and now I'm ready to cut some joints. Now before I go into cutting the joints, I want to sort of bring up a few things that I'm getting a few phone calls about lately. I'm going to use my H10. Now, the H10, for those of you who are new to this, the H10 is our smallest dovetail template, right? It's written on here H10. If you can see it, I'll put that up where you can see that. Just a sec. You can see here it's got H10 written on it. Right? Now each of our templates has a number there, H10, A10, B10 for dovetails. These templates do not cut finger joints. Okay, you can't cut finger joints on them because they're just not built that way. You need a different template. You need different cutters. Now, that's a question that's been asked a number of times just recently, and I thought I'd better say something about it. Dovetail templates are for dovetails. Finger joint templates are for finger joints. The cutters, or each of the templates has its own cutters, which brings me to another point that has come up recently as well. These are the small ones. These are the H10 cutters. Now, when you look at the packet on it, it says TGHD or TGHS 12 a quarter, all right? That doesn't mean they're for something else. What it means basically is that they are for the H template, which is this one, H10. Don't confuse that with these ones. These are the A templates. That's the next size up. Sorry, A cutters for the next size up template. These are TGAD and TGAS, TGHD, TGHS. That's for those ones. These ones are for the next size up, and they look very similar apart from the dovetail bits. They look pretty much, you can see that they're different. The two straight bits look very much the same, and you shouldn't confuse them. What you can see the difference between these is the H straight cutter is a chubby little fat thing, but it's only 10 millimeters long. The A cutter is tall and thin. Okay, it's 13 millimeters long. So there's the difference. So these two go together. The thickness range for the A cutters is 5 to 13 mil. The thickness range for the H cutters is 5 to 10 millimeters. And then of course the next size up is the B cutters, and you can't confuse them with anything because they're significantly different. They are quite large. Okay, and they have a spring on them. So try not to sort of, when you're ordering, or if you're confused about it, just work out H template, H cutters, A template, A cutters. Check the bottom of your template before you actually ring up an order. That way you're not ordering the wrong thing, and there's no confusion when it turns up here, because we don't know. as soon as the order comes in, we pack it up and we get it off to you as quick as possible. We try to sort of create that personal service that everybody expects when you ring up and order something. So think about it. Okay, now let's get back to cutting the joint. So our first task, once you get your router bits out, got everything sorted. If you have any other questions about it, by all means call us, and we'll help you out, but what I'm doing here is I'm just cleaning up my route a bit, making sure that there's no dust and stuff on it and my bearing's working okay. Same with this one. Just a little bit of oil. Now machine oil is fine. This oil that you get from Japanese Tools, and there's a link for that on our site there, is very, very good. And I've had this for a number of years, and as you can see, I still haven't used very much of it, and we don't use a lot. A little bit of oil on my reducing collet. So, pop that in there. Maintenance done. So it's that quick. All right, now centre line. Now this is the method that Chris Clark brought up for making multiple drawers, and it works really well when your drawers are all different sizes, which we did with the last little cabinet we did. And I found that it even works pretty much all the time for a lot of the other stuff that I do as well, when I'm making drawers for different things, where I have consistent widths of timber. Now, quite often I'm making 40mm drawers because it seems to be, it's quite an easy size to work with, and you can see we can get 2 complete dovetails in a 40mm piece of material. So when I'm making this special jewellery box, again, I'd use exactly the same sort of thing. So 40mm, it works a treat, particularly with the H10. There's a graph in our instruction manual telling me, or giving you information about recommended sizes for, or widths for timbers for the drawers and boxes and so forth. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark centre line on each end of the jig, because I'm going to do set one up here, and I'm going to set another one up there, so I can do them both at the same time. And instead of just using the middle of the jig, which is what I would normally do, but I'm going to do it this way. So I need to find a centre. So the centre between these two here, okay, so that'll give me a dovetail there and a dovetail there. Once I've worked my centre out, I'll then slide up my stop. So find my centre. Given me a centre line. Do the same up this end. Same up here. And that's given me a centre line at both ends. And so with my centre line on my piece of timber, if you can see that, there's pretty light. I've only put it on light because I've got to sand it off later anyway. So I've put it on light. So what I'm going to do is line that centre line up with this one. So it's just a matter of doing this. And once I have my centre line lined up, you can see I have the same space on either side. It just makes life easier. Do the same on this end. And now I'm set up to cut my joints. Okay, so I've got my stops in right place, got everything sorted. So now it's just a matter of putting my pieces in. Now, where do I want my dovetails? That's going to be the front. That's going to be the back. That's going to be a side. So, rule of thumb with drawers, your dovetails always go in the side pieces. That way, when it's all locked together, if you have a drawer pull on the front of it, when you're pulling and pushing the drawer in, it's locking the dovetail together. So that's the best way to do it. The pins will go into the dovetails. So that's the technique you need to use. So making sure that my face side mark is pointing at my stop.
When you get those both on, can you turn the jig around so we can see the lines lining up?
Yep. Now I've only used one piece to line everything up, so the important thing to remember there is make sure that your piece of timber, or all your pieces of timber, are exactly the same. And you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but that you can see where the line lines up. You can see my vertical line there. Real nice and clear. There you go. So that's how things line up on the end. And the thing that I've done is just made sure that I'm hard up against the stops and I'm hard up against, or sitting on top of that moved. We're hard down on top of the template, which is the important thing to remember. Now, adjusting a height. These are the opposing pieces. That's the bit that's going to go into there. So we use that to adjust the height of our router bit. It may seem to be same old for everybody, but there are people who haven't seen this before. And if you haven't seen this before and you're new to our channel, then subscribe, and you can see that we have quite a lot of projects that you can actually copy and work on. Okay, so try and get a 1/2 mil. There we have it. Just enough. Okay, so this one will be exactly the same, so they're both the same thickness. So that's my adjustment. Now we'll cut some joints. So ears on, everybody. I have to get myself some. Okay. So once you've cut those, it's then a matter of rotating like so, but move it up to the other end. Always make sure that your face side mark is pointing at a stop. And the same goes there. If you're a tiny little bit out with your measurements, doing this will ensure that your box ends up square when you put it together. Just making sure that we're all stopping testing. Okay, ears on. You'll notice, for those of you who have not seen it before and seen the jig in action, you'll see where I've got my hands when I'm doing my cutting. I'm only moving a very small amount, so you can see it's not very much at all. And I'm doing it with my hands resting on the table and just with my fingertips holding the jig. That's all you basically need. It's not one of these things that you grab a hold of like this and shove it onto the router bit. All you're going to do is break the router bit. Whereas this way, you've got a little bit more control, a little bit more finesse, and you can get, as you can see, perfect dovetails. So it doesn't take all that long to do all your dovetails. Now I could cut them by hand, and the purists who actually poo-poo machinery and equipment and things like that, well, there are other ways of doing things. So now what we need to do is we need to do the other side, do the pins. So we change our route a bit to the straight cutter. Turn the jig around to the other side. You'll notice with this one, I'm going to find my pieces. You'll notice with this one here, I've already cut the top of it. All I've done is turn the backing board. The backing boards are sacrificial. We don't need to mark any centre lines or anything on these because we've done it on this side. We've set the stops in place and they don't have to move. The thing that we need to remember is that our face side mark must be pointing out and hard up against the stop. Like so. Once you create that habit of doing this, you'll find that you'll rarely make a mistake. I know I make a few every now and then, but generally I'm not with this. Okay, adjusting the height. Now I'm using the piece that's going to go between them. And I want to adjust that to 1/2 mil. A little bit. I've locked it. Let's get it down a little bit. Whoop. There we go. Okay, now with this one here, because the spacing is further apart with the pins, we need to get a little cut across the face of the joint first before we actually take out the material behind it. So ears on, everybody. just a little test. Make sure I've got everything up the right way, but I haven't. So I'll just pull it apart again and do it on the other end. That's the bottom. This is the bottom. And we get a perfect fit. So that fits together just spot on. A little bit of overlap, on there, and we end up with a perfect joint. And you can see the contrast between the two colours. It looks really good, and that's going to show up on the box, particularly when we have a piece of material that's going to be added onto there like that. Okay, so that's what will show up in the box, just like that. Okay. Yeah, just finish off the rest of it. You'll notice the material is 7mm, and there's a reason for that, and I'll explain that when we start the next process. We could make it thinner, we could make it thicker. Again, you'll notice that I swap from end to end once I do a rotation, so it was there, it now rotates up to this end. Got a little bit furry on that cedar. You can see the difference between the two timbers. The silver ash is cutting really cleanly, and the cedar, because it's a furry timber, is starting to get a bit furry around the edges, if I use cedar quite a bit, so I'm aware of what's going to happen to it, and I make allowances for that. And if you're using the timber all the time, well, then that'll be something that you'll work out as well. So ears on, and we'll cut the second lot. Just stay in there, Pammy. Come back in. Now, one of the things that that I get phone calls about is tear out. People are getting tear out because, for many reasons. One of them, as I mentioned earlier, is that the different two timbers will cut differently. So some will give you tear out, some won't, depending on the density of the timbers. This one here is quite a dense timber. It's classified as a softwood, but it's not. I think it's a softwood, silver ash. No, I think it's actually a hardwood, and it's so that the grain on it is very, very tight. This one very loose. It is a softwood, so the pores in the timber actually are much bigger and wider, and therefore you get a bit more tear out. Now, to avoid a bit of tear out, this is what the best way to go. The router bit spins in a particular direction, it's around this way. So the best way to go when you're cutting is to make sure that you go in the right side of the finger and come out on the left-hand side when you do your final cut through. So you'll notice that on this one here, I'll get my pointing pencil. Get a pointing pencil. You'll notice when I go in here, because of the distance between here and the two fingers, this side of the bearing is actually rubbing on the template here, and there's a gap there. So what will happen is I'll go all the way into the back, and when I come out, it's reversed. You can see that I'm now touching there and the gap is on this side. So go in the right side, come out the left side. That applies to both sets of router bits. Okay, so when you're using your straight cutter, do that with that and you'll get less tear out. Whereas if you go in the left hand side, you're going to get tear out on the front of the joint. So go in the right side, come out the left side, but make sure you go all the way to the back. You should be cutting into the template. You can see where I've done that here. I've cut into the template, just there, all the way through. The templates, as I say before, are sacrificial. You can replace them. Sorry, backing boards. Pamela correcting me there, and that's correct. Backing boards. Gosh, I keep forgetting. Anyway, that's the drawer frame. All the dovetails cut, so I don't need my jig anymore. I'll put that back. Don't need those anymore. And I don't need my template, my router bit anymore, so I've got to take that out. So the next thing to do is to put a floor in it. So let's assemble the frame. So that's the front of the box, and it's the outside. This is one side, that's the bottom. Okay, let's see how we go here. Goes in there, and this one will go here. You'll also find that in a lot of occasions, if you cut a hardwood with a set on your jig, you'll get a nice clean cut. And if you use the same setting to cut a softwood, you'll often find that it's sometimes a little tighter or a little loose, depending on what you're doing. And that's because softwoods cut and expand as soon as you cut them, more so than hardwoods. Hardwoods give you a lot cleaner cut. But as you can see, now we have this beautiful little tray or framework, and lovely dovetails. So what I need to do now is I need to put a floor in that, and we've got 10 minutes left in today's show, so I'll go ahead and make the floor. Actually, I'll cut the rebate for the floor before we go any further. Now the rebate, we're using our rebate cutter, cuts a 4mm trench, 5mm deep. Now, I'm going to do this in 2 passes. So I'm going to take off the little bearing. This is the bearing that comes on the cutter. So a little one there, and I'm going to put on a bigger bearing. Okay, now that's a 19mm bearing. We have those for sale if you wish to buy one. And that's going to reduce my depth of cut down to 1.5mm. Put those aside because we're going to revert back to those in a second. Now the height. Now this is a tray. So when I'm cutting my boxes, normally I have a 10mm gap at the bottom so I can put feet in. In this case I don't need to do that, so I'm going to set the height 2mm above the table. That will give me 2mm of material on the bottom to support the tray base. So all I need to do now is rotate round here. And my first thought is safety. Remember, that's not glued together at all, so what I'm going to do is tape the box up. So just with some, I'm using fibre reinforced tape here. That way you don't get a stretch, or the tape doesn't stretch, and the box is going to stay together during the process. And you'll notice all I'm doing is sticking down the corners. Now, fibre reinforced tape doesn't stretch because of the fibres in it, but its glue is quite strong, so if you stick it down hard on cedar, it tends to tear the grain out a little bit, and that necessitates a bit more work. So now I'm going to rotate round here, so ears on everybody. Now I'm going to rotate with the rotation of the router bit so that we're actually climb routing on my first cut. Now it'll give me a cleaner cut and a nice clean trench all the way around, and that's the beginning of the cut, and then I'll continue with that after I've done it by changing the big bearing to a little bearing and doing the complete cut. Now the router bit cuts 5mm with the small bearing on it. We need to make sure that we've got plenty of material here so that we don't cut through the side of the box. That's why we have 7mm and not 5. Ears on. Now last week, you can see I've got this lovely little trench, and you can see there's only a couple of millimetres at the bottom, and that's all you really need. Last week, if you remember rightly, I cut my second cut on the wrong side of the box. So this week we'll be a little bit more observant. Change our bearing over. And this time I'm going to rotate against the rotation of the router bit, which is a technique that's supposed to be used every single time you use a router bit. Generally you don't climb route unless you're cutting small amounts. So with the rotation, so ears on everybody. So now you can see we've got this lovely little trench, nice and clean. The edges are beautiful. There's nothing worse than looking into a box and seeing the trench with tear out along the edges. And if you try to tear all that material out at once, generally that's what happens. So now, before we do that, before we pull it apart, we need to make some measurements. Now I want the rebates, they're 5mm deep, in those rebates. And if we go into the bottom of the rebate on this side and we come across to this side here, you can see to the inside edge we've got 161 millimetres, 166 millimetres. The bottom of the trench is at 171, which is 5 millimetres off that. So I don't want to go to the bottom there. I want to be able to allow the timber to expand and contract. So if I only go to 4 millimetres instead of the 5, I've got 170 millimetres. So that's the width of my piece of material. So I'll write that on 170. And then the length, do exactly the same, allow that millimetre. So I've got 241. Okay, so I can go to 245 quite safely and still have a half a millimetre around the outside. So 245. So 170 by 245. So what I need to do is I need to cut my piece of material to size. 170. And 245. Now a piece of cedar is the same material. I've just dressed a piece down to 4 millimetres. Now before I pull that apart, I'm just going to test to see if it's going to fit in the trench that I've cut. Now when you pull your box apart, make sure that you're supporting the framework when you do that. See, I sit it on here, I can just wriggle it very gently. Turn it around, do the same. You can see it's considerably tight. It's very tight. Gee, that was a bit tighter than I thought it was. Before I pull it apart, I'm just going to mark that and that. Those two go together. And when I put it back together, those two have to match. You only need to mark the two because the rest of them will go where they have to go. So I just check to see if my piece of material will fit in there. Oh yes, it's a perfect fit. It's nice. Okay, so now I just cut it to size. So over to my drop saw. Again, this has been sanded to 600. So my mark. This is what I mean about furry cedar. My other markers there. So, a little bit of sandpaper just to take the furry stuff off. Now I need to round over my edges. So over to my setup sander. Now this is the radius jig that I've designed, and you can buy You can buy a made up one from Dererk Lark. So ears on, everybody. Whoops, we haven't got a power there. It's attached to my dust extractor, and I had to turn the dust extractor on. Okay, so that's my box. Now, we've run out of time, so what I might do is we might leave it there, and I will assemble and glue that together for you next week, and then we'll also do some turning next week, and I'll make those little feet that you have. So, if you want to catch up with this bit, then next week, log on at 10 o'clock. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, and we'll give you a little reminder to let you know when we're going to be on the air, and we'll continue with the box or the tray. I was hoping to get the tray finished, but I was it just one of those things that didn't get finished today. So next week will be assembly of the tray, and then I'll turn the feet for you, show you how I've made the feet. So have a good week, everybody, and I will see you all next Sunday. So